we would love to see your face. So if you're comfortable, if you're open to, please turn on your camera so that Amrita, myself, and Adrienne don't feel like we are being TV broadcasters over here. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for those of you who turn it on. It's great to see your faces. All right.
All right. So let's get started. So hello and welcome everyone to another Lean In event on resilience, surviving, and thriving. I'm Amrita Agarwal, and I am the events team lead at the Lean In Canada's Vancouver chapter. And I'm really excited to bring this event to you so that we can all collectively become resilient and take care of our mental health while we live through this global pandemic. Thank you so much for joining us today and supporting Lean In throughout these events. We would love to see your beautiful faces, as Iris pointed out during the event. So please turn on the video if you're able to and comfortable with it. Thank you. So we will start the panel with a few questions from the Lean In team and then open up the floor for any questions that the audience might have. Okay, so let's get started. I am really happy to introduce our lovely panelists. Today, we have with us Adrienne Danielson, who works independently as a relationship and communications coach and consultant. As a consultant, coach, and transformational teacher, her goal is to assist both her corporate and personal clients with not only becoming aware of new concepts and skills, but to support them in their integration. Through new ways of thinking, which elicit different emotions, which lead to different actions, creating different results, her clients increase their capacity for more control over their environment and their lives. Adrienne, can you give us a wave? Thank you. And we also have with us Iris Kai, who is a coach, consultant, and workshop facilitator, passionate about helping professionals and organizations create lives and workplaces that matter. After over 10 years developing product and go-to-market strategies at large organizations such as TELUS, she decided to pivot from growing businesses to reinventing people and the workplace to be more purpose-driven and resilient. Iris currently coaches MBA students at the University of British Columbia Soros School of Business while running her own coaching and consulting practice. So can we get away from you, Iris, as well? Thank you so much. Okay, thank you so much, Iris and Adrienne, for giving your time and joining us today. And now, without further ado, let's dive deep into the resilience conversation. So our first question is a bit obvious. What is resilience and what does it mean to be resilient? Iris, why don't you start us off with this one?
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe to give you some background, resilience is, in my opinion, has a big R, the big resilience that is the kind of capacity that we develop when we are dealing with bigger adversities in life, like death of a loved one, huge job loss, right? Divorce. Those are more like bigger resilience or bigger adversities that we have to deal with. But there's also a small resilience, like the daily resilience that we could also cultivate when we have small events that kind of like trigger us or upsets us. So I kind of just want to set up a bit of that kind of definition based on my current understanding so far. And there's a bit of a textbook answer when it comes to the word of resilience too. In psychological literature, resilience refers to our capacity to adapt successfully to adversity. And it is something that experts believe that it can be cultivated through different kinds of strategies. So there's so many things that we could do to become more resilient. It's not the fixed kind of thing. And I mean, this is why we're here to this workshop. So that's kind of like my understanding right now. What do you think, Adrienne?
Absolutely. You know, you've covered a lot of it well. You really just in a nutshell, it's, you know, resilience is how well can we react to and bounce back from and move forward in life. in when we're dealing with difficult challenges. And, difficult challenges come in all sorts of ways. And what's difficult to one is not necessarily difficult to another. We learn our resilience initially at a very young age, and that is through what we've observed in the significant people in our lives around us, how they dealt with and reacted to challenging situations and crises in their lives. It's, a belief system that, do we have faith and hope that life will work out and that we have the ability to work through problems and challenges? And as we talk through the next hour to hour and 15 minutes, however long we're on here, we're going to cover all sorts of more specific, detailed components that contribute to resilience. But yeah, it's, really how well do we react and respond to challenges in our lives? What length of time does it take us to bounce back? And that's going to depend on the challenge. And to what degree do we impact the people in the world around us when we ourselves are going through trying to respond to a difficult challenge? It's a really big part of resilience. If we're taking everyone down around us, then that's not only, affecting our own ability to move forward, but then it starts to impact our world around us as well. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Iris and Adrienne, for helping us understand more about resilience and what it really is. So we tend to regard our coaches as absolutely perfect, but they too had to cultivate resilience in their lives through adversity and consistent hard work. What has your personal experience taught you about becoming resilient? And can you share your personal journey? So Adrienne, why don't you start us off with this?
Well, I certainly hope coaches aren't put on a pedestal of being perfect, because if we're perfect, then I don't think we're very good coaches. Oh man, how do I even begin at this stage of my life to think of, specific situations? There's so many, and I'm always dealing with situations that require resilience. I guess to use an example of one that really stands out in my mind is, having declared bankruptcy at a point in time in my life when I had already accomplished a fair amount in my financial situation in many areas of my life. And it was, it probably was one of the biggest, sideliners that took me off at the knees that I've ever dealt with, because it incorporated so many components of my life, my relationship, my finances, my sense of self, so many things that I based who I am and my sense of confidence on. So yeah, I would say that that's probably one of the biggies. And, for me, there were a number of tactics and components that I applied that in hindsight I realized I had, which some I had learned already, but I wasn't, and something I was conscious of actually integrating, and others I wasn't even conscious that I was integrating until I looked back on them in hindsight, and when I learned more about resiliency skills, realized that I had applied them. So I don't know if you want me to get into some of those now or not, but yeah.
Sure. Thank you so much, Adrienne. How about you, Iris? What's your opinion on this?
I echo Adrienne's comment that we shouldn't put coaches on the pedestal. I think nobody is perfect to begin with, no matter what type of line of work that you're in. And I think one concept I wanted to make really clear is that being resilient does not mean that you are invincible or you become invincible. Being resilient means kind of like imagine yourself like a stress ball. It's okay for you to bend or be squished a little bit when you're experiencing those can be very traumatic events in our our lives. So coaches, anybody could experience that and be hit hard, but it's the bouncing back, like how we approach those events that matter. So in terms of my personal experience, there are a couple things. Maybe saw some of our students here, and also maybe I'll talk about two quick stories if that doesn't bore you. So it's more like an academic experience, but also work. So there are times when I wasn't too resilient. I came to Canada maybe about 18 years ago to go to school. And then when I just came here, I had big ambition, but I was like, oh, wow, business school, SFU business, it was so competitive. And then how I approached that, let's say, adversity was that I just shrink my ambition. I think that, you know what, I can never compete with the people who grew up here. I'm an international student. I didn't get the type of education that really fosters critical thinking. So I honestly didn't try very, very hard. I still work hard, but the goals I set for myself was not as ambitious as I can. So that was actually a bad example of me really just not pushing myself to overcome the life's challenge. And another kind of another experience that I feel personally at work, that was a small adversity that I managed to overcome when I was working at Selves back then was at one time we're going into executive presentation about a strategy that I was leading. So they're all like VPs in our company back then. And then I wasn't able to get my manager's feedback until probably an hour right before the presentation. And he kind of picked apart my strategy. I have to really quickly redo the deck and almost like have to convince myself to believe in his strategy so that I could pitch it to the executives. And I was just really mad at him, at myself, and really flustered. What I did well though was that I kept telling myself, I changed my self-talk from that pissed off kind of mindset to something else, right? I said that, you know this, you've got this, you have all the answer about this market, and just be there and answer questions. So that really got me through that 1 hour meeting. So I thought that could be an example that illustrates some of the strategies that we'll be talking about later.
Thank you so much, Iris and Adrienne, for being really honest about your stories. And since, Iris, you've mentioned work and relationship, and Adrienne, you as well, we have the poll results here. So as you can see, this is what our audience members are more interested in sort of working on. So Iris, would you like to comment on that?
No, this is, I think it's great. Just wanted to know what is the type of areas that folks would like us to focus a little bit more. So I think this kind of helps us find out bearings.
Perfect.
Thank you for that.
So let's move on to some of the specifics about resilience. So one of the most important aspects of resilience is perhaps self-regulation. And I know me, I'm not at all good at it. And it is also the hardest to cultivate. So, what are some strategies that you have seen work for your clients, Iris, and as well as yourself?
Self-regulation. So I think first of all, for self-regulation, it really starts from self-awareness, knowing what your experience is like, for example, emotional experience. I think surprisingly for a lot of us, actually myself included, who think that we're really resilient, we probably don't get overwhelmed by emotions so much. But that could also mean that we weren't really in touch with those negative emotions that were really buried deep down. So for example, we could be really stressed out or really sad about something, but we kept focusing on the priorities at work and trying to appear strong and hold down the fort for work, for your family, for example, and you ignore those things that you're dealing with. So I think more long-term, we're talking about long-term resilience in this context here. or this example I'm giving here is that we need to learn to be aware of our emotions. And a lot of times it could start from being aware of our body. So I'll give an example. I just finished my master's degree in positive psychology, where a lot of the studies were done in resilience. And this past semester, we have a group meeting. So we need to chat, we do a consulting project for a nonprofit in the States. And I can, you come into the meeting, I had my ideas, my group mates were coming up with all the completely different ideas. And I just remember feeling my body having a reaction to that huge contradiction of an opinion, because I really have a strong opinion about how we should approach it, right? And I'm really glad that I caught that emotion, that bodily sensation, and because that gives me the buffer to think about, okay, what do you need to do with this now? And then I get to calm myself down and then be really to regulate how I share my disagreement in a more diplomatic way, without just, I guess, stomach or sucking up, or kind of like keeping my disagreement in the low down and not having a voice. So I think that is where we should start with, the self-awareness. And then once you're aware of this, right, there are a lot of skills that comes with self-regulation. I'll just mention one, which is knowing your thinking patterns, or knowing that you might be in a kind of a thinking trap. So thinking trap means a kind of a pattern that could be counterproductive. So for example, jumping to a conclusion, it's like a master thinking trap. For example, you're at work, right? And you send someone an email and they didn't respond. You may automatically jump into conclusion that they are mad at you because of a comment you made at a meeting last week. What else happened to me before? I had a client, I was really straightforward, probably a bit more blunt. I challenged myself to give her some feedback on something, but I was late, and I was really guilty about giving her that piece of feedback late because that might impact her job application. And later on, I sent her another email, didn't hear back. And then I was thinking, oh my gosh, she must be mad at me. But you know what? Later on, I found out that that person was just busy. So this is another kind of thinking trap. Like in the psychological term, it stands for emotional reasoning, which means that you made up the emotion that you think that person is experiencing, and then you just kind of like transfer that to them. Or you sometimes may even assume that other people should understand your emotion, and you're just sulking because you make that assumption too. So if you go online, Google thinking traps or unhelpful thinking styles, there are a lot of easy tips that can help you work with that.
Thank you so much, Iris. And I'm sure like most of us will definitely use those strategies that you mentioned. So once we cross the self-regulation hurdle, there is still the nagging voice inside our own heads that keeps telling us that we can't do something. Adrienne, you've been working in this space for quite a while and addressing this issue using a number of principles, including NLP. So could you share your thoughts on how to reprogram our brains entirely?
Well, it's a big topic, reprogramming our brains. And so I'm going to touch on it briefly. And NLP, for anyone who isn't all that familiar with what that is, NLP itself stands for neuro-linguistic programming. It's a approach, a philosophy that was really, it started in the early 70s, came out of California, of course. There's most of those kind of out there brain theory, psychological things tend to start often. Anyhow, it I got my certification in NLP a few years ago, and it really triggered my deep interest in the brain and the research that's been done on the brain over the years, and in particular over the last 20 years, and the science behind it, which I love to integrate the science into philosophies, because I think it gives it more substance, and it helps people understand better how the processes actually take place and work within us physiologically. So when we talk about reprogramming the brain, without getting into all the components that would help you understand how and why that works, I'm going to just talk more about what some of the processes are in that. So, when we talked about tactics, when Iris talked about tactics, and one of the things that she brought up was the component of emotional awareness, self-awareness. And in particular, if you want to be able to work on controlling your emotions more, you actually have, and Iris, you touched on this, which was great because it leads into this so well. You touched on, being aware of what our emotion actually is. And there's a term out there that's called name it to tame it. And unless we actually are able to name our emotion, it makes it very difficult to start to shift that emotion into something that's more productive. So often we feel our emotions physically initially. And so when I'm working with a client, excuse me, what I help them do is really clarify what the emotion is. So say when I'm trying to work on my resiliency, one of the components is that I feel afraid. I just feel fear, but I don't know it's fear. I feel it in my belly, or I feel angst, or I want to avoid things, or I feel frustrated. But as we work through the process, say you eventually realize it's fear, and then we need to get into what is it fear of? Okay, so then let's say we're talking about fear of the unknown, which is often a big component in it being challenging when we're faced with a change, or as I referred to my bankruptcy, what the hell? There's so much unknown in the future as a result of that. So if I have a fear of the unknown, I need to be aware of that, and I need to be aware of it. That's what's impacting me. So in order to reprogram my brain, I need to know what that is. So that's part of the process. The brief description I'll walk you through here as to reprogramming your brain, we can do that with ourselves. I apply this practice all the time on myself, but it's because I now know the process really well. If I was working with a client, once we realized what that emotion is that they want to shift, then I walk them through a visualization process. See, our brains respond to pictures. And so that is why visualization is so powerful. That's why athletes have used visualization for years. That's why it's incorporated in this type of work. And so because our brains respond to pictures, we want to visualize a different result. But because our brains also respond to all 5 of our senses, which is our hearing, our taste, our touch, our smell, and our sight, when we go through the visualization process, we incorporate all that. You've probably all experienced that you're walking down the street and suddenly you smell a smell. It could be food, it could be anything, and suddenly you're just like overwhelmed with emotion. And that emotion is coming from a memory. It could be a good memory, it could be a bad memory, but the smell itself, and smell is actually one of the highest stimuli when it comes to emotions, you incorporate that. So in this process of reprogramming, I would walk a client through visualization. And in that visualization, we bring up the event that they want to be able to experience differently. And in that process, I walk them through experiencing it differently so that they actually incorporate feelings and emotions that are more productive, that are more positive, that will help, that will replace the emotions that they want to replace. And we do that, and we bring in all of the other four senses as well, so that it's very integrated and embedded within the brain. And because of what I said, the brain doesn't know the difference between what's actually happening in front of us and what we have created in our minds. So you now are telling your brain, this is reality. This is who I am. This is how I feel. This is how I respond in this situation. And we spend some time in that state. And then we come back out of that visualization process. And that's, in a nutshell, how we reprogram our brains. So that our brains now have a new story. And we are part of that story. That's why visioning the future is so powerful, because when we create a future state and a future vision, and we incorporate so many things with it, like what do you hear? What do you smell? What are you touching? Our brain is registering all that. And we know now the neuroplasticity of the brain, that it actually new pathways that are going to create new behaviors and new responses. And there's this one last thing, because I don't want to take this too much time. You can tell I get very excited about this topic. I'm incredibly passionate about this topic because it's powerful. Is that, I'm going to lose my train of thought here. Okay. Oh, there's a part of our brain that's called the RAS, the reticular articulating system. And you've heard of the law of attraction and everything else. Well, yeah, there's science behind all this, but what the articulating system does is, it's like if you decide to buy a new car and you go test drive them and you're looking at pictures of them and everything else, suddenly you start to see these cars all over the street. You see them everywhere and you never noticed them before. And it's like, why? How come suddenly everybody else is driving this car? Well, they're not. Your brain is now looking for things that will match you up with that. And so, anyhow, I could go on and on about this topic, as you can tell. Backing up to reprogramming, that is how you do it.
It's awesome. I actually have a question for Adrienne quickly, if you could humor me for a quick one. As you know, the rewiring of the neural pathways with this new association between, for example, that smell with a probably more empowering thought, a more positive thought. How often, how long should that exercise be repeated for that change to become more permanent?
It shouldn't have to be repeated very often at all. As a visualization exercise, it can be. It depends on how deep it depends on a lot of things. It depends on the resistancy of the person, and it depends on how deep the emotion and associated events with that emotion go. So if that emotion was created out of a deeply traumatic experience that I had as a child at a very young age, then I may have to spend a little more time with someone working through that. However, the brain doesn't need more time. In this work, there are people with phobias that have walked out of the room with the phobia no longer. There are people who have had deep-seated anger issues who literally, it's not that they don't still get angry. We're talking the ones at road rage where they pull someone over and, want to wring their necks for, no valid reason other than they've got a lot of anger in there that's just waiting to unfold, that just don't do that anymore after one session. So it's really, really powerful stuff. What I find is that for myself in using this application, and as well as working with clients, is afterwards, it's not that you necessarily have to go through that deep visualization process, but to apply that again yourself as often as possible, to relive that to integrate it further in your own mind is really powerful to do. Consistency is huge with everything, as we know.
Thank you. It's amazing.
Thank you so much, Adrienne, for pointing that out. And that car example has happened to me too many times, and now I know.
I know, it's a good example.
Yes.
It's happened to us all, I think.
Absolutely. So yeah, while we are on the subject of cultivating resilience, what are some things we should keep in mind? Iris, what do you think there if we've missed something?
What do we need to keep in mind? Maybe I'll share a little bit of some general strategy, and then I'll pick one of them to expand a little bit more. So for those of you who are nerdy on this topic, there's actually a lot of resources online. You could go to Google Scholar. I don't know if you're not belonging to a particular academic institution, whether you can still look it up, but give it a try, or just a simple Google. There's positivepsychology.com. There's actually a free resilience toolkit, lots of stuff that you can download. But what I'm trying to say is that there's so much research and practice being done in the world of resilience, and lots of strategies that can help you with that. So we talked about self-awareness, regulation, cultivating optimism, right? Adrienne mentioned hope, knowing that there's still something out there that we could accomplish, right? Being mentally agile, right? We talked about reframing, being able to willing to see things in a different light, being creative with that, about that. Being willing to ask for help. I think that's one of the important points. Sometimes we're so used to being strong, or we thought that, well, I'm being resilient. But resilient doesn't mean being independent and not asking for help. We're wired to be very social, and we need to be willing to get support from others, to be vulnerable and say, you know what, I don't know the answer, or I'm really like in a rut right now and I need some time off. You need to be able to walk away, and it's not a sign of weakness when it's done properly, obviously. Exercises like the physiology stuff, mindfulness, sleep, nutrition, and then self-efficacy, which means the belief that we are the owner, where we can affect the change that we want in our lives. It's one thing that I think we need to cultivate in our process of building resilience. And what does that really mean, though? How do we cultivate that self-efficacy? Number one strategy that the psychologists, they actually would prepare, they do research, and they just help us understand which ones are better than the other, right? Actually, visualization is one of them. And having vicarious experience, like trying to see, oh, wow, that role model, right? I'm just thinking about some people like Sheryl Sandberg or Elon Musk, and you're like, wow, they get there. I want to be like that, right? Those are good ways to have a role model and model towards them, and to build our efficacy. Having a coach, having career advisors, or good family friends, they're all great ways. And also visualization, imagining, like your brain is familiar with that. But the number one thing that psychologists found is that performing that actual act that you're kind of like unsure about is actually the number one, the most effective way of building that self-efficacy, building the confidence, and then you can make small steps, right? For example, feeling uncomfortable about a stretch project, but still raising your hand to do it anyway, and not being afraid of failure. I think that is a really, really good thing of building that capacity, building that big buffer, so that that's how you become more and more resilient, so that in the future, you know that when you hit adversity again, you know that, you know, I've done that last year. I think I can do it again.
Thank you so much, Iris, for pointing that out. Adrienne, would you like to add something?
I don't want to be redundant. I think, you know, so often we can get caught up in the why me, you know, and I'm talking about when events happen in life. There's a couple of things that, you know, there's a ton of research, as Iris has referred to, and there was research done on countries and which countries were the most resilient. And it was found that Japan was actually the most resilient country. And, you know, a couple of the reasons that contributed to that was they actually have an approach where they realize, excuse me, but like shit happens in life. There is an expectancy that stuff is going to happen. And so what they found is in that research, and I actually made a note of this because I found it really quite fascinating. But as usual, I write a whole bunch of notes, and then once I get started, I talk and talk and talk and have no idea where my notes are or where I'm at in them. But the whole piece with Japan being resilient is, as I said, oh, here we go. They accept that stuff is going to happen, and they apply a long-term view. So, okay, this has happened. So in the long term, what do we need to do in order to get to where we need to be as a result, and to get to it? And that's, you know, a really big part of resiliency is that, okay, so now what? Attitude. Okay, so this has now happened. So now what? So now what do I need to do? What do we need to do if we're talking about an organization to get past this, learn from it, move forward? What is going to make a difference? How are we going to, it's a very future looking approach and a realization that stuff happens. And so instead of it being a poor me, why did this happen to me? How could this have happened to me? Blaming all the other things that created it, it's going, yeah, okay, that all happened. Those things did happen. Now, what am I going to do about it? What are we going to do about it? How do we move forward to the future? It's a huge, huge part of resilience. You know, when I went through the bankruptcy, there were external factors that contributed to that were totally beyond our control, and that I could have stayed for a long time, and it kind of felt good, I got to admit, a lot of the time, to blame. This happened because, you know, it just feels better sometimes to blame other people for the situation and stay. But that's such a victim approach, and it's such a, you know, it doesn't get, the only person that's really harming in the long run is you. So I think that's a really important piece, and it's asking, some of the tactics are asking productive questions. So, you know, what did I learn from this? What's useful about this? What could we learn from this? What do I need to do to get beyond this, rather than questions like the what ifs and starting to accept, what if I never figure it out? What if I end up here? What if this happens? It's that whole exaggeration and imagination getting carried away, which you have no control over. And, you know, so those are really important things. Catch yourself in both of those situations. Okay, let's not blame. Let's get on with it and figure out what we can do. Let's ask productive questions, because those productive questions will take you out of that mode and will start you looking forward to the future. So, you know, a lot of times resilient people, if you study, and a big part of, you know, NLP and what I did when in the bankruptcy, I'll keep referring to that because it's an example I've used. I talked to people who had declared bankruptcy and were successful again in life. I talked to them, and we shared, and they shared how initially it impacted them, and they shared, you know, different ways that they approached it, and it gives you hope, and it helps you learn from other people who have done it, who have been there, who have been successful. And, you know, so that's another tactic. Like Iris commented on that too, you know, use a network, use supportive people. Know who the people are in your life who are non-judgmental, who are going to support you, who will listen to you, and who believe in you. And sometimes those are the only ones you want to be connecting with for a little while as you get through something. And those are some things. There's lots, but those are some.
Thank you so much, Adrienne, for sharing that. And since we've talked about being individuals and being resilient and about countries, Adrienne, you've worked with both individuals and corporate clients. So what, according to you, are some ways to cultivate organizational resilience?
Yeah, that's such a valuable question. You know, I think leaders have a lot to do with that. And, you know, leaders, it's really important, and I consider it a responsibility of a leader to learn resilience. And if you're not displaying resilience yourself, then it's going to be very difficult to create a culture where employees feel that they're able to deal with change effectively, and you know, and challenges that they're faced with effectively, whether it's challenges that arise within the work environment or challenges they're dealing with at home that you can't leave. You bring those things with you. So, you know, leaders need to learn resilience. And it's interesting. Another research that was done in resilience in countries is Poland has the highest percentage per capita of coaches linked in with their leaders within organizations, because Poland has realized the impact that those soft skills in leaders and those resilient skills has on the culture and the productivity and the ability for everyone in the organization to work through and move forward through difficult things together. So I found that really interesting, that that's part of research. I think if you take, if a company, take a look at some of the really sound change management principles. Those principles they work for a reason. They help people move through change. You need to deal with conflict. To build a culture where people are able to be more resilient, you have to deal with conflict. And honestly, like, conflict is part of my background and part of my certification and the work I've done over the years. It's incredibly destructive, and more destructive than most organizations realize, because most people don't know how to deal with it really well and effectively. So the tendency is to avoid it. And it's probably one of the primary things that I worked with leaders on, was leaders trying to deal with conflict that they didn't feel really competent to deal with. Understandably, it's not a skill most of us have. So the problem is if conflict isn't dealt with effectively within an organization, it causes high levels of stress. And when employees are already feeling high levels of stress, then their ability to be resilient is reduced right off the bat. So, and if they don't see conflict dealt with well, then their trust in the company being able to effectively work through challenging times is already compromised. So those are definitely some components of creating a culture that's more resilient. I think leaders need to consider being more open and honest and willing to listen to challenges that are brought up by employees, and to deal with them with courage, and to deal with them honestly, and allow people to talk, and to to look at things in advance. You know, when we know as an organization that events are going to take place or change is going to happen that's going to require employees to be resilient, you know, look at eliminating as much as possible that doesn't need to be there. We often, and I say we because I've worked within a few organizations, and in leadership roles, we tend to just we get going on the momentum of the change and why it needs to happen, and usually does need to happen, but we then are dealing with the symptoms instead of, you know, looking in advance. And I think I'll go back to the change management principles. Look at those, review them, apply them, hire someone to help you if you're going to go through big change, and it'll help a lot. There's another thing that I know I could talk about this a lot, so I have to watch my time, but there's a couple of people I was going to refer that are huge in this topic and have done a ton of research and spent time. One is an Albert Bandura, Bandura, which some of you may have heard of. And there's just a wealth of knowledge that he has to share.
Canadian psychologist too.
Yeah. He is actually social cognitive therapy, personality psychology, behaviorism, cognitive psychology. And he was very involved in what's called the social learning theory, which I won't get into, and the construct of self-efficacy. But there's also someone by the name of Barry Zimmerman. And he conducted extensive research in this area and has written a ton of articles and on learning situations. So really, really valuable information there. Anyone who's wanting to look at how do you incorporate a more resilient culture, there's lots to learn, or just learn yourself about resiliency. But Bandura, actually, he created this, what's called the wheel of change. And you know, I won't go into the details of it, but it's something that can be applied in organizations within teams. And it's really, really cool because it draws on each individual's natural innate skills to be resilient and brings them up and brings them forward. So everyone is aware of who within the team or who within the organization has these aspects of skill in the areas of resilience, and they can rely on each other, because it's important that you don't always rely on just that one skill you have. You need the others as well. So, you know, if you're able to become aware of that, it's a really cool process. So, you know, that's something that you could always read up on as well within the work that he's created and published and is out there.
Thank you so much, Adrienne, and thank you for sharing those resources with us as well. So before we open the floor for audience to ask more questions, are there any strategies that you would recommend or advice you would give for someone who is embarking on this journey to become resilient? How about you, Iris?
I took some notes, but I found it really hard to pick one. Just so go with an easy one, and then because there's probably a very diverse audience here, and everybody is thinking about resilience in different contexts. So I want to make sure that our suggestions are useful to you. So one thing that Adrienne, you inspired me to talk about is when we're going through a hard time, it's really important to step out a little bit and look at that big picture and think about to make sense of it. Like we are human beings are sense-making creatures. Like we like to make meaning of things. And we like our life's narrative to be coherent. When it's disrupted, we're like, what's going on? That's not how I want my life or want this project or want my job to turn out to be, right? So you need to kind of learn to make sense of it and think about what did I learn from this? And then, or what caused this? And then, like Adrienne said earlier, right? Like, how do I get out of it? What's kind of like, how do I rebuild that storyline, right? Like in movies, great movies, there's always like an arc, right? The hero ran into a challenge and how they overcome it. Like, think about yourself like the author of your life story, and try to think about how you can rise above the ashes and hit that growth space, no matter how big that adversity or how small it is that you're dealing with. That might orient you to something a little bit more elevating and carry you through that difficult time.
Thank you so much, Iris. How about you, Adrienne?
Yep. I have one thing to say. Meditate.
Yeah.
Start to do it
Yeah.
and make it consistent. We all have an inner guidance. Whether we believe we do or not, it's there. And the only way you're going to hear it is to quiet your mind. And we live in, well, COVID's helped us slow down a little, but we live in a state of busyness, mental busyness, and our minds are meant to be busy. Our minds are meant to think. They're geared to think. So it makes sense that we're always thinking. But when we're always thinking and we're always involved in stimuli outside of ourselves, and we're always on our phones, and we're always on our computers, and we're always chatting, and we're not being still and quiet. And it's a really, really important component, and I cannot advocate it enough. And it needs to be consistent, and no matter how hard it is for you to do, and I've heard so many people say, I just can't do it. I just can't do it. I can't shut down my mind. I can't shut down my mind. Well, you need to keep practicing until you do.
Yeah.
Because it will impact your world in a way that you have no idea. And it started for me many years ago when I started to do yoga consistently. Finally, I've been saying to myself, I want to do yoga, I want to do yoga, I want to do it every day. I want to get older and be this healthy person because they've stretched and made themselves strong and blah, blah, blah. Never did it, never did it. And finally, I just went, the only way you're going to do it is you just got to be determined. And you got to wake up in the morning, and even though it's dark and cold out, you roll out of bed, you don't think, you get on the mat and you start. Anyhow, I started it, and I suddenly 3 weeks later, I'm at work and I'm going, why am I dealing with things so differently? Why am I so much calmer? Why are these things and these people that used to just trigger me, not really triggering me so much? Not that things still don't trigger me. I don't mean that. I'm not this Zen, person inside all the time. Then I realized it was my yoga. And it's because during yoga, I would focus on my breathing, and I would be quiet, and I slowed down, and it impacted my day every day so significantly that I didn't even have to force myself out of bed. I did not want to do it because I knew the difference it made. And that's what'll happen if you meditate regularly. And that's all I have to say about it.
Yeah, if I may just quickly attest to that, absolutely, Adrienne, you kind of, that was another tip that I was thinking, oh, should I talk about that or not? I think meditation or anything that cultivates the state of mindfulness, and of course there are other types of meditation too, is that you get to practice regulating your attention. When it comes to mindfulness, I think a big myth is that you have to shut down your brain. It's actually not the case. It's about observing your experience and not to engage with it, and not to be judgmental with what you have observed. And we are so critical of ourselves. I was thinking, like so many of us, right? We were very judgy. And then we have the negativity bias. We just get attracted to things that don't go well, that it's a gap in our lives. Like I probably do that and catch myself doing that all the time. So meditation, when it calms you down, right? It turns up parasympathetic system, right? And helps you not be so reactive, like Adrienne was saying. And then you get to decide, okay, do I want to do anything with this or not? And you are more compassionate to yourself too.
Thank you so much, Iris and Adrienne, for sharing your thoughts on this. Thank you so much, panelists. So this is the end of the questions from Lean In, and we can now open the floor up for any questions from the audience. If you would like, you can type your question in the chat box, or you can just unmute yourself and start speaking, either whichever you're comfortable with.
Oh, I just realized that there's quite some chats and comments in the chat. So I wonder whether we also want to go through them as well, Amrita?
Sure. So Dina shared a book that she's recently read on meditation for fidgety skeptics. And I'm actually really looking forward to read that because I'm very fidgety for sure. And yeah, some people asked about the researchers that Adrienne had mentioned before.
All right. Okay. I'm finally caught up here. Thank you. Any questions? Don't be shy.
You can just type it in the chat box if that's more comfortable.
I have a question. You talked about meditating. How long do you both meditate every day? Or is it kind of you just integrate it with your yoga practice?
Do you want to go first, Adrienne?
Sure, yeah, and I just lost my whole screen here, so terribly sorry about that, everyone. I don't know if you can still see me, hopefully.
Yeah, I can see
You
you.
can, good, okay. How long? You know, it depends. I depends on how much time I have. Like it's never under 20 minutes a day. You know, there's times when I spend more time than that. And it depends, yeah, it depends on how long it takes for me to quiet my brain down often. But, you know, I don't know. I think any amount of time someone sits and tries to just quiet themselves is going to be of benefit. I think we start to just know ourselves when we've actually reached a good state. But I would say, you know, anywhere from 20 minutes to however long you're able to spend. But it's not about spending hours in a state of meditation. It doesn't take a long time. It's more, you know, as you practice it, it becomes easier to get to that quiet state. So I don't know if that really helps you. And I think it's very much an individual thing.
Yeah, maybe I'll share a little bit more. I think, Dina, it depends on which stage you are in and also what's the purpose of that meditation too. Sometimes, for example, like when I was in school, all day of classes and during lunchtime, I'm just so sleepy, right? And then I could just sit there for maybe like 10 minutes and it could be incredibly rejuvenating. Like when you go through this kind of like relaxation process, it could equal the research that says that it could equal a couple of hours sleep. And in the military, people are actually trained to do that because soldiers, they don't get to sleep regular hours, right? So those are kind of like more utilitarian way of using meditation to help us out, to address a particular problem. And if you're really busy, like lately, I find it really hard to do more than 20 minutes because I kind of just got involved in so many things, but even less than 20 minutes, like 5 or 10, they're better than nothing, right? It's the consistency and the experience you give yourself. But I would say if you have been doing that for some time and you want to advance to a little bit better, maybe even like get into that quiet space more, I would say 20 minutes. So many people said 20 minutes or plus, like Adrienne said too.
I would also suggest that sorry, Iris, I didn't mean to cut you off. I don't know if,
yeah,
that you do it first thing in the morning, if at all possible. I mean, anytime you apply it, but the value in first thing in the morning is you haven't gotten yourself all involved in the stimulus of the day. Like before you open email, before you check your whatever you check that you feel you need to connect and tie into on your phones or your devices, it's prior to that. Because like for me, I just started getting up earlier.
Yeah.
Because if I didn't, I was finding it really difficult to fit into my day. But you know, as you can tell, I'm obviously a strong advocate of it now. And to me, it's probably one of the most important things that I integrate into my day because I know the impact it will have. So I cut time into my morning. I'm better off with half an hour less sleep and having meditated than not and trying to cram it in. So that's how I approach it. I also stop throughout the day. And I mean, yesterday was a perfect example for me. I was really getting stressed out about a few things, and like really stressed out. And I just had to, as hard as it was for me to do, because I needed to get these things done and I just wanted to stay immersed in it, I actually forced myself away and I went outside and I spent half an hour outside walking, and it had a totally different impact on the rest of my afternoon and my whole approach to my mental state that I had gotten myself into. So, I mean, any time throughout a day that you can do it, but that's my recommendation. Carve your time out in the morning and just do it.
I'll do that. Thanks.
And I would agree too. Morning is the best. And you get to visualize and set some intentions on how you want your day to turn out too. I saw a related question from me, Edie. Do you have any favorite meditation or yoga blogger or experts to recommend? Adrienne, do you know anybody?
Oh, there's so many, you know, and to me, it's really a personal choice. I would, well, you know, to use a very well-known name, Deepak Chopra has some really, really cool stuff and he's, you know, you can hook up with him on Instagram, but even just to go onto his website, he's got a great supportive, all sorts of teachings, learnings, different meditations on all sorts of different topics. So that's one. But again, I think it's a very personal thing. You know, not everyone's going to connect with him and how he approaches it. And yeah, I would just research and start trying a few, you know, check them out on the internet and listen to a few and see if you connect with them or not.
Yeah, I agree. Deepak Chopra was the person I go with when I started out meditation, the 21-day meditation challenge.
Mm-hmm.
He just launched an app too. So totally agree. John Kabat-Zinn is more like he's a doctor as well. I think he's probably the pioneers of bringing Eastern, like this meditation practice from into North America. But I don't know from more like making it really accessible to us as consumers. I don't know how much work he has done. Yoga expert. I mean, yoga, I love yoga with Adrienne on YouTube.
Not just Adrienne, no. There's someone, I thought I would mention this man. It's not, well, yeah, he does totally get into meditation, but if you're interested in the brain and all of the science that's been done behind the brain, and this man actually incorporates a big spiritual component to it. His name's Dr. Joe Dispenza, and it's Dispenza. Fascinating work, and he's a neuroscientist himself. So, and he's just incredibly involved he works with the Heart Math Institute. He works with all sorts of other institutes, and yeah, and all sorts of cool brain stuff. If you like the science behind those things, he's a really, really, you know, you might find him interesting. He also does meditations.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Adrienne Aris. We have two more questions, and I think those will be the last two. So we have a question from Braun on would either of you have thoughts on this hypothetically angry situation where you're having hypothetical arguments with people in your mind which feel draining and unproductive? It seems for me personally, these have been triggered more during COVID with more time and the underlying uncertainty of the time, sometimes even with strangers. Would love to hear your strategies for redirecting this kind of discourse or your thoughts on the underlying reasoning of what's triggering these consuming thoughts.
I have a bit of a hypothesis. I'll just maybe quickly run with that, and Adrienne, let me know what else you have to add.
Yeah.
I'm thinking this hypothetical reaction, especially during COVID time, could be because of whether it's you or whoever you're talking about, feeling that you are being, like there are psychological threats that you're experiencing. So, for example, like at Solder, I give workshops, right? Like when you're at a workshop and then you're seeing people and kind of like not engaging or not not kind of answering your questions when you're trying to say, hey, what do you think? And then later you see negative feedback, and then like me, like I would feel that, oh, my authority or my hard work was compromised. It wasn't appreciated, right? Like kind of just like my jump into the conclusion. And then it's very easy to want to argue that, to want to maybe say, well, kind of like maybe put other people down or be defensive. So it could be because there's something that you imagine, whether it's true or not, like you feel something is threatened. And it's maybe a strategy to deal with that is to affirm yourself. And it could be other people helping you out, you really orienting yourself to something more positive. Think about what are some happy moments, or some psychologists call it some sacred moments that you could cultivate, because that would create some psychological resources, right? Some our positive emotions has a lot of beneficial neurological benefits for our brain. It elevates you, you see the big picture, and when your attention is focused on that, then your defense level just goes down, and that's a way of building resilience. What do you think, Adrienne?
I actually would have trouble responding to this without understanding more about what's going on for this person. You know, having hypothetical arguments with people in your mind, my first response is to say, stop it. And I know that sounds really, and it is really simple, but there's a theory behind just like, stop it, catch yourself and stop it. Like what, you know, it sounds almost like a habitual pattern that you've developed for whatever reasons. And again, I'm going like, I would want to have a much longer conversation with you to understand context behind this. I think there could be all sorts of contributing factors that I have no idea of what they might be. Is it draining? Absolutely. Have all of us, if not most of us, dealt with similar situations? And Iris gave you a good example of, you know, how she can relate to that. I've gone down paths where I've created scenarios in my mind that never existed. And I just imagine them existing and happening. And next thing I'm knowing, I'm having an argument. I'm actually responding to the other person in this argument with this great answer, and it never even flipping happened. So stop it. Catch yourself. What am I doing? Why am I doing this? And change your thoughts. Get on to something else and be aware of the fact that you're doing this. Now, again, I'm not in any way trying to simplify this for you or reduce the importance of it and the impact it's having on you. Not at all. I would want to know more in order to really get down to some contributing factors. But that's, I mean, I just had to learn how to catch myself and go, you're creating something that doesn't exist. And so you can do that and drain your emotional energy on something that never has happened, or you can change your thoughts right now and move on to something else and let this go. Be aware, catch yourself, shift.
Yeah, Adrienne just reminded me of a very almost like seminal strategy in cultivating resilience. It's actually from cognitive behavioral therapy. Is based on the model that your thought influences your emotions, right? And which influences your action. Mm-hmm. So question your thought and think about, okay, is this accurate thinking? Is it helping me? Mm-hmm. And typically there's this acronym of ABCD. So A is that activating event. B is identifying that belief. behind that, right? Like you're having that hypothetical argument probably, you're assuming that that person is saying certain things, and like Adrienne said, that you wanna name it to tame it, right? So you need to say it out loud, and then C is the consequence. What is it doing to you? And D is the dispute. So you want to question yourself. What's the evidence of this person being disrespectful or not liking me? Or what are some alternatives? Maybe this is not the only choice in front of me. There are other options for me, right? So be able to question your thought. It's very crucial.
There's a hilarious, if you're interested in Googling it, it'll be on YouTube. If anyone remembers, oh my God, am I going to remember this now? It's a guy who was a comedian, and he had a TV series, and he was a psychologist on it. And
Frasier?
No, it's before him. And it's the actual title of the YouTube thing is Stop It. And it's hilarious, because that's what it's all about, is this whole, maybe I'll think of his name before the end of our call. But anyhow, I think there was another question too, wasn't there?
The last question was, how do we compartmentalize our stress and triggers, as the stress from work and relationships and family affect each other a lot?
Good question. Well, it's not always easy. I mean, we're talking about, again, I know that compartmentalizing is a strategy, but it's sometimes easier said than done. And I don't know that this is, an answer that's really what you're looking for. There's practicing and applying tactics that, again, it's being aware of the fact that, I'm now leaving this behind as I walk through this door. I'm now leaving this behind as I move into this situation. It takes a lot of, depending on the degree of the impact that those situations are having on you. And, it's about coping, really. It's about being aware of, I have this taking place right now, and it's impacting my ability to be present and my ability to function at the level I want to while I'm going into this next environment. And being aware of that fact, I find, saying that we're just going to shut it off and forget about it until we leave work, until we leave home. Those are easy words to say. They're not going to do it just by telling yourself I'm going to shut myself off. I think being able to talk about it is important with people that we trust. And, if it's at work, knowing those people you can trust, hopefully you have a boss that you feel good with and can share with, and to say, I just want you to know, I've got some things I'm dealing with, and I know that they're impacting my emotional state in my mind right now. And I'm here, and I'm, wanting to put 100% into everything. And I just want you to know that if you notice a little bit of a difference, or if I'm not, that's it. But that's the only reason I'm talking to you about it, is just to let you know that. And same as coming home, if you're dealing with really difficult things at work, hopefully you've got an environment at home where you can just share and say, hey, you don't need to talk about everything you're going through necessarily, but to say, I'm having a tough time, and I know that it might impact in some ways who I'm bringing home right now, but I just wanted you to know that. And that can help a lot. Sometimes we try to cover it up and Sometimes we try to pretend that it's not that big, and sometimes we try to be strong and push on, and we need to incorporate some of those components, absolutely. But as we all know, you can't just shut it off, and it's going to creep out in other ways. And then now you're dealing with that repercussion. You know, I don't know how many times I've come home from work and ended up in, you know, some kind of just a difficult conversation with my husband. And it's got nothing to do with my husband. It's all of the emotional stuff I brought home with me. And if I'd simply said when I walked in the door, you know, baby, I had a crappy day and I'm feeling this way right now. And, you know, I don't want it to impact how I'm interacting with you, but it might. Boom. It's out there. And you've given yourself permission. And get help. If you're really struggling with things, when I was an employee relations consultant, there were so many people who I worked with who were really, really struggling with certain things. And, you know, it's okay to seek help and support to work through that.
Yeah. It seems like there's an assumption that we need to compartmentalize, but it's not necessarily the same thing. I was going through marriage issues and eventually a divorce years ago, and I shared that with my team, and then my manager says that you need to go to spa, you need time off to do something, do it. And that brings us closer actually with our team, and it's actually your act of building trust with your team too. Sometimes you might feel that, oh, I can't trust that person with my personal life, but by being vulnerable and saying that I'm actually feeling a bit tender right now because of the stress that I'm going through, it's a step of building a strong relationship, paradoxically.
Yeah, it's true.
Okay, so I think in the interest of time, we'll end the conversation here. And thank you so much for joining us this evening. And thank you so much, Adrienne and Iris, for giving your time and energy and helping all of us become more resilient. And we definitely have some great strategies for staying afloat and taking care of our mental health. And I'd also like to thank you all for joining us and giving Lean In your time and energy. And a recording of today's event will be shared with you all in our post-event email. So please continue to support us and join us for our other events. Thank you so much. We hope to see you in the next event. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting me.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Have a good evening.